Hi friends, you're tuned in to Legal Means Business, a podcast by Leeway. We're joined by some amazing guests who help us identify how to take your legal function and career to the next level. I'm your host, Steph Smith, and we're talking all things legal ops and legal tech, as well as other critical skills needed to help you thrive in the evolving in-house arena. Don't forget, you can watch us on YouTube or listen on the go through Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you enjoy the conversation, please do hit subscribe and let us know what you think on social.
And the reason we started it was that during oneNDA, the whole project that lasted kind of 6 to 9 months, we created an audience of around 10,000 lawyers globally. But we realized that there was more appetite for not just standardization, but collaboration between peers in the legal industry, because it's not really something that we do. In order to share knowledge, we have to either pay for it or we have to go to a conference that, again, we have to pay for. Whereas if you look at other industries, like the software industry, for example, things like GitHub or Stack Overflow are staples in that industry, and they're platforms where people come to collaborate and work together to solve common problems. And in an increasingly complex regulatory landscape, lawyers just don't have the means to just chat with each other and to share knowledge, or to work on projects that are going to help further the profession. So we started Claustack because we wanted to turn our audience into a community.
Contracts are broken. They're too long, they kill deals, and they take up a whole load of time for the legal team, the business, and your counterparties. The result? The process is either super slow, the deal doesn't get closed, and relationships become damaged and strained. Working in the contract tech space, it obviously kills me to see this happening all too often. Contracts present real business value, and they open the door to new opportunities. That's why I, along with many others in the industry, are super excited to hear about the launch of a new legal community platform. Following on from the success of oneNDA, a community-led standardized NDA initiative, Electra Japonas and her team decided to launch a platform where lawyers can come along to collaborate on common standards, share knowledge, and access templates for free. Enter Claustack. Let's hear from Electra.
Hi Electra, thank you for joining us on the podcast once again.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, well, I thought it'd be good to catch up because I know you've been super busy and you've got a lot going on, but something in particular that we're hoping to chat about today. So I know in March you were very busy and you had an exciting launch. Would you be able to tell us about Claustack, please?
Yeah, sure. So we launched Claustack on the 16th of March, and Claustack is a standardization-focused legal community platform. And the reason we started it was that during oneNDA, the whole project that lasted kind of 6 to 9 months, we created an audience of around 10,000 lawyers globally. But we realized that there was more appetite for not just standardization, but collaboration between peers in the legal industry, because it's not really something that we do. In order to share knowledge, we have to either pay for it or we have to go to a conference that, again, we have to pay for. Whereas if you look at other industries, like the software industry, for example, things like GitHub or Stack Overflow are staples in that industry, and they're platforms where people come to collaborate and work together to solve common problems. And in an increasingly complex regulatory landscape, lawyers just don't have the means to just chat with each other and to share knowledge, or to work on projects that are going to help further the profession. So we started Claustack because we wanted to turn our audience into a community, and we kicked that off on the 16th of March, as I said. We've already got nearly 700 members, which is crazy. And today we launched, we just launched oneDPA as well, which is a project on Claustack. And it's been a busy time.
Yeah, honestly, it's very impressive, and the things that are happening, and the it sounds like the response that you've had has been incredible as well. A lot of demand there.
Yeah, I think there is demand for just a place where we can come together rather than work in silo.
Yeah, especially I'm thinking. Obviously, I've got a bias towards in-house lawyers, but it just feels like it's such a great idea, especially perhaps if they're solo in-house lawyers or really small legal teams, to have that kind of knowledge in a network that you can easily access or kind of collaborate with other people to improve what you're doing. Just is one, super helpful, but two, also just a little bit more fun and engaging, and I imagine it'll create a lot more fulfillment for a lot of people, to be honest, especially maybe in smaller legal teams. So that's pretty cool.
It's hard when you're a small team or you're a solo lawyer in an organisation. You just don't have the infrastructure or the support. So this is hopefully somewhere that people can come to get that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And what does Claustack look like? If I were to go into Claustack, say as an in-house lawyer, what are the kind of areas and what can you get involved with?
Yeah, good question. So the first thing is the About section, and that explains the philosophy behind Claustack and why we think it's needed. You then have projects, and that's where you can go to participate in open projects like oneDPA. We're not the only ones that are going to run projects on Claustack. We're already talking to organisations that want to run their own projects, so hopefully there'll be lots of other people that are running their own standardisation initiatives on the platform. And what we've done within the projects part of the site is we have built tools and processes that basically scale up the process that we used with oneNDA. So we think that with oneDPA, whereas oneNDA took us 6 months to do, we think that oneDPA will take us 6 weeks to do. So that creates a much more scalable framework for more standardization initiatives. And hopefully, once Claustack becomes mainstream, then you'll have lots and lots of documents that can go and live in the library, which are open source and free for the public to use. So the project space is where you go to collaborate on open projects. And then once a project is finalized, the end document, if you like, will go and live in the library, which is the next section on Claustack. And the library is basically a folder, if you like, of lots of free templates that are being called standards. We already have more templates on there, not just oneNDA, but there are other templates on there as well. So check it out. They're all free to download. And then we have a section for news and events. So we're trying to collate all the legal events that are going on in the industry for people so that they've got somewhere to go and register and find out more about them. And that's how the platform works.
And what, obviously, you spent a long time working on oneNDA as well. So what kind of sparked the idea for Claustack almost, and why is it needed now?
Yeah. So when we were doing oneNDA, we were surprised at how much time people were giving the project. So we wanted to understand a bit more about their motivation. So we conducted this survey and we asked the oneNDA community, why are you involved in this? And about half of them said, because we really hate NDAs. But the other half said, because it's a great opportunity to collaborate with peers on something that's going to further the profession. And we kept getting that response from people when we were talking to them. They just said it's nice to just work with people rather than just against them. And in an in-house environment particularly, it's really rare that you get the opportunity to work with a lawyer. You're usually working against another lawyer, so either in a negotiation or a dispute. So just having that opportunity to collaborate towards adding value to your own profession, I think is very empowering. And I just think that the time now is ripe, because after COVID, we all kind of became a bit isolated in our own living rooms and kitchens. And just having that opportunity to come together is something that's, ripe.
Yeah, totally. And you're right, other kind of teams in the business or whatever have had similar things for years and years and years, and it's been quite a foundational part of what they do and how they learn and where they find knowledge. So it's Yeah, you're right. It makes total sense when you think about it. It's quite astonishing that it's maybe taken us so long to get here. So it's amazing that you're spearheading that initiative, and people will be sure to find value in that, I have no doubt. What are the kind of foundational principles behind Claustack?
The foundational principles behind Claustack. So effectively, the way that contracts work today is completely broken, in my view. You have really complicated, complex agreements, very, very long. And the reason is that over the next the last kind of 10 to 20 years, what we've done is we've taken a very risk-averse approach to contracts. So every time there was any sort of case law or new regulation that came along, instead of just relying on that or taking a more sensible approach to the risk involved, we have included more and more and more words in our agreements to make the agreements total risk annihilators. It's not possible to annihilate risk, even if you put it in an agreement. So what you're ending up doing is just fattening up that agreement to the extent that it's just not a workable document. So when an agreement hits a lawyer's desk in an in-house environment, particularly it's a 100-page agreement for a SaaS product, it's just a very laborious process. And the stuff that you're reading isn't always pertinent to what it is that you're doing. So we need to rethink the way we do contracts, particularly now where businesses are growing faster and we live in a digital era. There's more deals going on and we just can't work with them. And there's evidence to support that, which is the fact that lots of lawyers in-house again have things like matrices that say, if it's under 20K, I'm not reading the agreement. Well, that just shows you that the agreement is not fit for purpose if you can't read it. At which point have we just said, let's just sign this because I'd rather take the risk instead of taking the time to read it. Whereas if it was succinct, you'd be going into it with your eyes wide open. And that inability to consume all that information and process all the contracts that you've got it just creates this insecurity in you about how you're doing your job. So it kind of creates a friction for you, stress. It's not fulfilling for the person. So there's a business problem, which is the fact that they're really expensive and laborious and take ages, and you might be taking undue risk. And then there's the personal problem, which is as a lawyer, you're not really fulfilled by your role if you don't feel like you're doing a thorough job, right? Mm-hmm. Yep. So the reason I think that contracts are broken are firstly the fact that contracts to date have been considered the intellectual property of law firms and legal tech companies. They're not open sourced. They're proprietary. And actually, if you think about it, the whole business world hangs off a bunch of contracts. That's all businesses are. So how can we say that they're proprietary? What's in there that deserves protection from an IP perspective? Not much. But the fact that each law firm has been hoarding their own agreements and their own templates and using that and selling that as value has made it impossible for us to innovate and to make these things better. So if we open source them, then that would allow people to improve them, to work on them, to collaborate, to share knowledge, to think about ways to make them better. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that there are no standards really in the commercial contracts world. There are standards in certain industries like ISDA or data protection world where we have the SCCs, or the construction world. There are areas in the law that have standards as a staple, but that's not everywhere. That doesn't apply to the general commercial world. And what happens when you don't have standards is that you end up being in a situation where you've got an MSA or you've got a playbook that sets out what you'd agree to in an MSA, and the other side has one as well. And each party will take a very favourable view towards themselves. Then you enter into a conversation with the other side and you do this really expensive dance, which is like a red line ping pong, where you're exchanging red lines until you come to somewhere in the middle. Whereas if we were to create balanced, fair, easy to read, standard contracts that you enter into from the outset and they're neutral, that would save so much time and money for businesses everywhere. So standardization and open sourcing are absolute key to innovating when it comes to the contract world. So that's the philosophy behind Claustack, and those are the things that we want to achieve with it. And those are the problems that we think we can solve if people get on board.
Yeah, for sure. And it sounds like the whole process, from what I can tell, it's very well kind of thought out process to a standardization project. Could you kind of summarize what that might look like and kind of, I guess, why you've created it in such a way?
Yeah, there's been a lot of thought that's gone into this actually, and some very long, deep conversations here at TLB around the standardization process, because it was really important that we nailed that with oneNDA, otherwise we don't think it would work. So there have been other standardization initiatives, but the way they kind of happened was that someone comes along with a document that they think is really good, and they say, here's a document, this is now a standard. Firstly, just to be clear, that's not a standard. A standard is something that has community consensus that it's a standard, right? It's like if we all had our own personal currency, you can't exchange that for value because it wouldn't be a standard currency. Same with contracts. We need consensus in order for that to be the case. So the process is as follows. The first thing that we need to consider is whether certain principles need to be in or out of an agreement. And that's because when you're a lawyer, what you do with your brain when you're reviewing a contract is two things at once. The first is assessing whether you think a certain principle should be in or out. The second is whether you like the drafting and the words that are used to express that principle. But sometimes you get bogged down in the drafting, you don't really think about the principle, and then you just let things in, because you're familiar with the language. So what we want to do with our agreements is keep them succinct. If it's unnecessary fluff, it shouldn't be in there. But if you start off by looking at the drafting, I don't think we'll get to the result that we want. So what we're doing in the first instance with one DPA is we have broken down a DPA that we think is quite good into a bunch of principles. And we're asking the community to come and vote on whether they think those principles should be in or out. And within those principles, there are also variations of the same principle. So you can choose the variation that you think is suitable for this sort of agreement. And then in the second instance, what we're going to do is we're going to collect all the votes and see which principles have made the cut. And then we will hold a design thinking workshop to bunch up those principles into provisions and agree the structure of the document. We will then go and draft it with the support of other lawyers. And then we will put it to our steering committee. We haven't announced our steering committee yet. We're hoping to do that next week. But the steering committee now has a slightly different function to the steering committee on oneNDA. So whereas with oneNDA, they helped put together the principles, they helped with the drafting. We now know that by doing that, you get groupthink, firstly, if you're all in one room. And secondly, when you put that document out to the public, that's when you get the real feedback. So we are going to the community first, and that's another step towards scalability of this process. Yeah. So we're going to put together the document and we're going to give it to the steerco, and we're going to ask them, as corporates, can you adopt this? Or is there any barrier to you being able to adopt it? Because that's really what we want from them. We want them to be the first to market to adopt it. We want them to be early adopters, and we want them to influence others and influence others in trusting the document, because if it's good enough for these 10, 20 big organizations, then you trust it. So that's what we want to use Steerco for. And then once they give us their feedback, we will iterate and issue it as version 0. So then the community will have a go at giving us their feedback on the drafting. Then we'll collate all that feedback and then issue it again as version 1. And when it's issued as version 1, then people can download it and use it.
Yeah. No, I love that. And we've spoken about before, obviously, we did a whole podcast on legal design, and it just makes sense, the whole iteration process, which isn't something that lawyers are generally taught to do in law school, but is certainly, with initiatives like this, becoming much more common. And I think that's where you're going to end up with the really good, really valuable contracts, for example, in this instance. So that's, super cool. And I love that you're taking a community first approach as well, and then using the steerco as more of a sense check almost, rather than being led that way. But yeah, if you can gather adoption from those organizations, obviously, because they generally have the power to enforce their templates, I suppose, onto counterparts. So a great way to spread the news as well, I guess, about this standardized document, which is pretty cool.
Absolutely, thank you.
So what is your kind of vision for the future of Claustack then, I suppose? I know you've touched on the initiative, oneNDA that you're working on at the moment.
Well, I'd like to normalise standardisation, really. That's the main driver behind this. Coming together to create standards and use standards and iterate on them to make them better and better is, I think, the thing that's going to really change the way that we do law, that we do contracts, that we work in in-house environments. I think it can be really impactful and disruptive to the status quo. So the vision is that we get to a point where it's actually not cool to use your own template. You have to use a template that's a Claustack template. So that's the end goal. And I'm hoping that people will see the benefits, both financial but also personal and just time saving, to incentivize them enough to come to the platform and drive more of this work.
It's interesting that you did touch on all the different groups. It really does seem like a win-win-win situation. So yeah, can't encourage people enough to go and investigate. And we've talked a lot around the benefits for lawyers and things, and then we've touched briefly on the business impact. But I think that's huge as well, right? Obviously the kind of time saved, but the negotiation phase, like there's just so many business impacts. Obviously we're on the Legal Means Business podcast, so again, slightly biased there, but I don't know if you want to just kind of highlight it once in a summary, the kind of business impact for using something like Claustack.
The business impact is huge of this because the current way we contract delays deals, it makes salespeople angry, it costs a load of money, it damages relationships. If we can find a way to accelerate contracting, then first of all, there's an immediate impact to your bottom line because you're contracting quicker. There is an impact on your teams because they're able to work more autonomously without constantly having to rely on lawyers. You're spending less money on your legal team and you're deploying them on more strategic initiatives. It's a massive win-win. And also, it's not the best start to a relationship, to a commercial relationship, hitting someone with a 100-page contract. So having that ability to contract really quickly in a slick way is really, really good for business. And I think that's the message that we need to be driving to get this stuff to become mainstream.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, it's exciting. Very exciting. And just to finish up, I guess, how can people get involved? What can they do? Where can they go to get involved with Claustack?
Glad you asked. So if you go to claustack.com, you can create an account. It's free and you can log in and you can go and collaborate on open projects. As I said, there's only one open now, but there will be more. You can go to the library, you can download documents and you can get involved with the community. And don't forget to say hi.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you so much. I'm sure lots of people will certainly be signing up and joining the masses that you already have. So thank you so much for sharing all about Claustack and the vision and the way the industry's going, really. So it's an exciting time. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Steph. Appreciate it.